Yeah.
Yeah, so...
Hence what Australia's doing.
Anyways, let's move on to the...
So what is this, Joe?
There's a vaccine
Military?
mandate for the military.
Yeah.
Now, there's a lot of, like...
My sister's husband was talking about this, too, so, because he's a National Guard soldier, so...
Oh, yeah.
He probably knows some
Is
stuff
he
about
vaccinated?
this. Yeah.
Okay.
I believe so.
So, Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin said that members of the Army National Guard who refused to comply with the Biden administration's vaccine mandate would be prohibited from undergoing the required training and drills they need to maintain their status as guardsmen. In an internal memo to leaders of the armed forces, according to the Associated Press, Austin spelled out the new policy directing leaders of the force service branches to publish guidance dealing with men and women serving in the National Guard who refuse the vaccine. Quote, vaccination is essential to the health and readiness of the force, end quote, Austin said. The vaccine requirement is part of the military's medical readiness requirements, the AP reported. All members of the armed forces, or armed services rather, are required to be vaccinated against COVID-19 unless they receive an exemption for medical or other reasons. National Guard members are reserve members of the armed forces under the auspices of the federal government, but their funding and, by extension, pay come from separate sources, the AP notes. Under their normal state active duty, guardsmen report to the governor of their state and are funded and paid by the state. However, when they report for scheduling training, as they must do at certain times of the year under federal law, or are responding to federal declared emergencies, they operate under the authority of the state but are paid by the federal government, which is confusing to me. A procedure called Title 32 status. This is also different from Title 10 status, which is only for when guardsmen are called into federal active duty, in which case they both report to and are paid by the federal government. So, all of that being said, yeah, so the armed forces, whether that be the National Guard, I know you just kind of said the National Guard there pretty much,
Yeah.
but literally all of them are being mandated to get the vaccine. Now, I'm going to tell you why I don't have a problem with that.
Yeah.
In a second here. And this next section here is
Kind of why.
kind of why, and it kind of proves my point. The military have been subject to vaccines in the past.
Yeah.
So-
yeah. With I'll talk about it with smallpox.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this is from governing.com. So it actually began with George Washington in 1777, less than 1 year after the U.S. declared independence from Great Britain. During the Revolutionary War, smallpox was the biggest threat to the Continental Army, threatening to inflict far more damage on the troops than the British forces. While 18th century Americans didn't fully understand the science behind smallpox, they knew that it seemed to break out in crowded areas, like big cities or military camps, and killed 1/3 of all who contracted the disease. Doctors in Massachusetts first deployed a crude vaccine in the 1720s,
Dang.
and leading figures including Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin, and Martha Washington received the inoculation. To administer the vaccine, this is kind of gruesome, guys, mute it if you don't want to hear it, doctors lanced a pustule of an infected patient and then sliced the same knife under the skin of a healthy individual. The vaccinated patient usually contracted a milder case of smallpox, rendering them immunized against potentially deadlier strains in the future.
That's fascinating, actually.
Isn't that smart? That's actually kind of cool.
Yeah, that's crazy.
I didn't know about
like,
this until I read it. Despite the life-saving benefits of the vaccine, many officials distrusted the science, which is what's going on today.
Oh, yeah!
Like, think about that.
History repeats itself, truly.
And blamed the inoculation for spreading the disease. Under this assumption, the Continental Congress had banned inoculations in 1776.
I wouldn't have done that.
And so, for people who don't know...
a small inflamed elevation of the skin that's filled with pus. Yeah. Basically a pimple, guys.
Yeah, so it's kind of gross when you think about it. It's like what they had to do. But apparently...
I found fellas were not dummies like the left likes to think they are.
So here we go. By February of the following year, however, Washington was desperate. Smallpox was attacking his soldiers and giving the close quarters at camp. There was little he could do to prevent its spread. As regiments from the South planned to march north, he took drastic action to prevent them from catching the disease once they reached Philadelphia. After catching smallpox as a teenager and living with the scars on his face to prove it, Washington knew how deadly the disease could be.
Dang.
and a more effective and less gruesome smallpox vaccine was invented in 1796. And since then, American soldiers received the vaccine from the War of 1812 to World War II. Starting in World War I, the Army added vaccines against typhoid.
Yeah.
During World War II, vaccines for influenza, tetanus, cholera, diphtheria, plague, and yellow fever were also required. By 2006, soldiers in the armed forces received 13 different vaccines and additional doses depending on location and regional conditions.
Oh, but dude, and if you want to talk about like even more vaccines, specifically the Navy, since they're on ships, you would think that they would do that even more than normal.
It's almost like a cruise, you know. They're all close quarters, and
so they would see probably the most out of any branch. I would assume.
Yeah,
I would assume.
But all that
maybe the National Guard because of pure numbers.
Mm-hmm.
But
all that being said, to make the point that there shouldn't be an issue with getting vaccinated if you're part of the Army
because the founders did it.
Yeah, and you're part of the government. You're working for them.
You need to be as healthy you can be when you go to war.
Yeah, that's the whole goal.
Yeah,
is to keep the soldiers healthy because you don't want them dying before they even get into battle. I mean, come on,
seriously, yeah.
So yeah, I can. That makes sense to me.
Yeah,